Well, good morning. We've got better music here than Jazz Fest. I'm glad to see you all here. Isn't that just beautiful? We've been talking about some pretty advanced lessons lately, but you're a pretty advanced group here at Unity, so that makes sense. The subject has been how to evolve each one of you into your very highest spiritual potential, which some call enlightenment. Others call it manifesting heaven on earth. It's basically about overcoming the problems and the negativity that plague most people so that you will be able to live in a permanent state of joy and peace and love and abundance. Most of us enjoy those states sometimes, right? When we don't get out of the wrong side of the bed, or when circumstances out there fit with our inner ideas about what is good. The point, though, is to be able to remain permanently in that state so that we are not at the mercy of outer circumstances. And at least for the present, till we get to that point of manifesting heaven on earth or enlightenment, we can learn to live in this state of joy and love and peace and abundance more and more often. This doesn't mean that we don't try to change some of those outer circumstances that need changing, but it does mean we don't suffer when we can't change those things. We've talked about the 4 stages of development which lead to this kind of spiritual growth: discipleship, crucifixion, resurrection, and service. Discipleship involves committing to the spiritual path, really committing and learning all you can about it, the path, and yourself through a lot of study and self-observation. Crucifixion involves letting go of all that doesn't serve you on this path after you have honestly observed yourself and identified the things which you need to let go. Resurrection comes about after you have been engaged in this process sufficiently to truly transform yourself and become a new person, someone who thinks and acts in an enlightened way all of the time. And service is helping other sentient beings on this planet. Now, this can be done in several ways, mainly sharing your growth experiences, your wisdom, your knowledge, which also, by the way, reinforces that wisdom and knowledge within yourself. All teachers know you learn by teaching. Or service can involve helping others get to the point where their basic needs are met so that they can go on to these higher order needs. If someone's starving or in physical or emotional pain, getting enlightened is not their primary focus. So today, I'd like to really zero in on one of the important aspects of the very first step, which involves committing to the spiritual path and learning as much as you can about it and about yourself. Committing to the spiritual path is a constant thing, of course. It's every day. Sometimes it's every minute. It's not a one-time event, committing. Every time you're tempted to judge yourself or others or your world with old programmed negative judgments, you must recommit to seeing things as they really are, without conditioned, often negative filters. Often, if someone looks or acts in a way that's different from our conditioning, and if we're asleep or going on automatic, we judge them according to our programming. It takes commitment, constant commitment, to keep reminding yourself that what you are really dealing with on an absolute level, and think about it, you all, what you're really dealing with is just a bunch of sound waves or light waves out there. And that all of the perceptions and the judgments of this neutral event are strictly, they're our own patterns. That's how we're perceiving them. The patterns can cause you a lot of pain and suffering, but getting rid of them is also sometimes uncomfortable. At least it's uncomfortable to our egos. We need to continue on a constant basis to recommit to our spiritual path by wiping off our lenses, and that way we can see the reality of the situation. Where, as Gurdjieff once said, nothing, absolutely nothing, comes between you and what is observed. No judgments, no programming, nothing. It's just the situation and you. No filters. According to the Course of Miracles, we are the ones who give meaning to absolutely everything. So if we have negative programming, which most of us do, we will see the whole world and others as suspicious, ill-intentioned, evil, and basically bad or incompetent. The point is, of course, that the experience we have in life is totally up to us. You've probably heard the old story of the Chinese man who moved to a new town and asked the Zen monk there what the people in that town were like. The Zen monk answered with a question. He said, well, what were the people like in the last town where you lived? The newcomer answered, oh, they were awful. They were always doing bad things. They were crazy. They were incompetent, a bunch of losers. The monk said, well, unfortunately, that's exactly the way they are here. Another newcomer moved to the town and asked the same wise monk the same thing. What are people in this town like? And the monk again answered with the same question. What were the people like in the last town where you lived in? Oh, nobody got along. The authorities couldn't rule. Everyone was lazy, miserable, a sorry lot for sure. The monk said, I'm afraid to tell you that that's the way they are here too. A third man who had recently moved to the same town asked the same question of the monk, who answered with the same question. What were the people like in the last town where you lived? The third man excitedly replied, oh, they were wonderful. Everybody was sharp. They were hardworking. They were so nice and loving. People helped each other. They elected officials who were wise, and all the people worked together to make things better all the time. I hated leaving that town, but I got transferred here. So how are the people here again? The newcomer asked. The wise monk answered, well, aren't you lucky? The people in this town are exactly like the ones you left in your last town. Yes, we create our world. We carry our stuff with us. We see others and ourselves according to our conditioning, and it's very advanced stuff and extremely hard on our egos to finally admit that we create our world. It's hard to own up to our mistakes and to accept that how we see others and how we see the world is our own stuff. To admit that we are asleep most of the time and going on automatic. Sophisticated little stimulus response machines takes years of work. It also is what frees us to like, respect, and have compassion for everyone, including ourselves. And that peaceful, loving, stress-free state and feeling of oneness with all life and with the divine and all its parts, that is heaven on earth. Yes, changing our perception is a huge part of our spiritual evolvement. And for those of you new today, by spiritual evolvement, we don't mean just being good, honest, ethical citizens. That is certainly the sine qua non of any spiritual path, without which nothing. It's the prerequisite, but it is by no means the spiritual path. There are certainly the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots that any decent person will follow. And it's true that some fundamentalist religions stop there and concentrate on all the sin and hell and damnation. But these prerequisites we take for granted that's where we are. And they are the prerequisites to the spiritual path. They're not the spiritual path. They're the prerequisites that keep people's lives and society from being chaotic. But the true spiritual path goes far, far beyond human decency. In fact, you don't have to be spiritual at all to be an ethical, good person. You do have to be an ethical, good person to be spiritual. But we're talking about also a much, much higher level than just common decency. What we are talking about today is a more advanced teaching. It's about realizing and internalizing the oneness of all life, the interconnectedness of all things, to the point of never, ever wanting to harm anything or anyone, because among other things, you are that person. You are that thing. So it would be like hurting yourself. It is seeing when your ego or your lower self, your more self-centered self, is dictating your behavior. It's seeing that and owning up to it. And at that point is when you recommit to the spiritual path. For example, sarcasm, revenge, dishonesty, and cutthroat competitiveness at the expense of others. People on a spiritual path graduate from that behavior. They watch it, they admit it to themselves, and they recommit to a higher path all day long. And the payoff is much, much happiness and little stress. You know, it wasn't so very long ago that if some member of a tribe did something bad to another tribe, the whole tribe would pay for it. That kind of revenge used to be accepted and went on for a very long time. The idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was a huge spiritual step forward. The first giant spiritual step. The idea that only the member of the tribe who committed the egregious act would pay was a huge step forward spiritually. The second big spiritual step was when Jesus started teaching that we should turn the other cheek, forgive and forget. Well, it's now time for a third huge spiritual step that a lot of us have been involved in for a long time. We must learn to see our part in the way that we see and interpret all these things that need to be forgiven and forgotten, all these shortcomings of others. Much of the world still says that it's okay to seek revenge in some way. Some people do this in physical ways. We see fights and killings going on all the time in big cities. Others have been programmed to strike back in the form of gossip, sarcasm, passive aggression. This is often considered to be more civilized. But both are equally spiritually unevolved. And it does little good to just grit our teeth and do the right thing when we are still feeling negative. You know that doesn't work. We must deal with the root of the problem, which is our interpretation of the events or the people in the first place. It's our perceptions that need to be changed more than outer events. If we get to the root of things, our perceptions themselves, we can change things instantly and perfectly and constantly and permanently. And changing our perceptions is developing the greatest power that we can have, the greatest. It is the power to choose our everyday experiences, our very reality. You have that power, each one of you. Most of us have been taught that reality is out there, and that our perceptions are simply an inner understanding of this outer truth. For a long time, this view seemed to be backed up by the scientific viewpoint, that the universe was like some great machine consisting of a material substance that existed independent of our perception of it. Big old machine out there. Let's try to understand it. This paradigm existed until some 20th century scientists developed theories and principles that suggested that the universe might be very much unlike a big machine that exists independently of our perceptions of it. Dr. Albert Einstein developed the theory that time, space, and events did not exist in an absolute way, independent of the observer, but that the reality of these things depended totally on the position and the motion of the observer. I kind of think of that as like when I'm in one of those car washes in the service station. You know, you feel like your car is just moving along and you want to take control of it, but in reality, it's all those brushes out there that are moving. Anyway, a few decades later, a German scientist named Werner Heisenberg took it a step further. He showed that our very observation of subatomic particles affected their behavior. It was impossible to totally separate the observed out there from the observer. It was impossible to separate the out there reality from our observation of it. So did the tree really fall in the woods if nobody was there to see it? In more recent years, physicists have made an even more startling discovery. Some scientists are suggesting that we not only affect the out there reality by observing it, but in a way we are creating it as we observe it. The line separating physics from metaphysics has become very thin indeed. These recent developments in science would probably seem much less startling to those who have studied the literature of mysticism through the ages. The message from Zen Buddhism to Christianity is that there is a reality greater than the material world that we live in, and that by seeing this reality, we can change our lives. I think that's why a lot of people say, you know, the nihilists, that it's all pointless. On the relative plane, if that's all you believe in, it might be. Those people are missing this greater reality. Jesus was constantly admonishing his disciples to lift up their eyes, to judge not by appearances, and to wake up. That's one of Shakespeare's major themes, appearance and reality. This has been a major subject in Buddhism and Hinduism, the whole idea of Maya, or illusion, for example. The principle that we create our own reality is well known to Jesus and other spiritual masters. Let's take a look now at how we can use these ideas to choose our experiences. Every experience that we have has two aspects to it. One aspect is the content of the experience, and the other aspect is the context of the same experience. The content of the experience is the outer factual event. The context of the experience is how that event relates to our desires, our expectations, our judgments, our programming, our mental framework in general. So you've got the content out there and the context in here. The way we respond to an experience is not based solely upon the content of the experience, but also on the context of it. For example, suppose you wake up one morning and you see that it's raining, like yesterday. The content of your experience is that you perceive, hey, it's a bad day, it's cloudy, it's raining. How you react to that content depends on the context in which it's seen. If you had plans to go to Jazz Fest yesterday and you woke up early in the morning, you might have been very sad to see all that rain, very disappointed. If you're a farmer experiencing a drought, you might have reacted with great joy, of course, to the same exact thing. If you had plans to go work all day and to stay in the house and do it, which was the case for me yesterday, you might have been entirely neutral about the whole event. So my reaction was neutral. Jazz Fest people, negative. It's the context in which you perceive the experience that determines your reaction to it. You have the power to choose your own experiences, to create your own reality. We may have little control over the content out there, but the truth is we have complete control over the context of every experience. You and you alone create your judgments, or at least you choose which judgments to accept, which values, which expectations, which beliefs, all which form the context of all your experiences. One might say, but wait a minute, my parents, family, society are also responsible. Well, that might have been true the first 15 or 20 years of your life, but if you're an adult, you now have the power to choose whether or not to continue with those beliefs and that whole belief system that you were given as a child or not. The only power anyone or anything has over your belief system now is the power that you choose to give it. The word context comes from the Latin word which means to weave together. Indeed, the context of our experience is indeed the way that we weave that experience into our belief system. Think of each experience in your life as being sort of like a strand of wool. Life gives you the strand of wool, but it's up to you to weave that strand into your consciousness. Imagine two people with identical little strands of wool in front of them. One is a master weaver. The other is a novice. One may produce a beautiful tapestry. The other may create nothing but a tangled mess. It's the same material, but it's the way that it's woven together. It's that context in which it is used that makes all the difference. I'd like to offer you a context in which to perceive the content of your experience, a context which might help you weave each experience into a purposeful and meaningful life. The context is this: everything is perfect. Everything. Perfection is a principle upon which the universe functions. It is not a fairly good universe. It is an absolutely perfect universe, God's universe, if you will. Our life can reflect that principle of perfection. Jesus said to us, "Be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." In other words, we can access our inherent divinity within, our inherent ability to resonate with the perfection of the universe. We don't have to be victims of or slaves to society's programming. That robs us of our peace and joy every time we interpret a neutral action as bad. We tend to think of perfection as something fixed and static. We all have these mental images of perfect this or perfect that, don't we? We may try to live up to these images, and we may try to get others to do so too, usually without success. These images in our minds of perfection stem from our culture and our past conditioning. These images of perfection, which are largely oriented around appearances and behavior, have nothing to do with the perfection in the sense that I'm using the word right now. I'm using the word perfection in the sense of a universal principle that expresses the truth that the universe is a pure, flawless, impeccable, whole, harmonious universe. When we can see our life experience in this same context, then we will recreate a life of joy and harmony and love and beauty and abundance that we can really scarcely imagine at this point. But what about the bad experiences that I may be having right now or have had recently? Fear, anger, illness, feelings of lack and limitation. How can you say all that is perfect? Well, imagine this. Imagine that you have been assigned in some spiritual group to go out into the forest and spend the day sitting on a log observing a rotting cow carcass. Maggots and flies are everywhere, and it doesn't smell too good either. And you want to be in there listening to the guru teaching. He's brilliant, right? He's a Harvard professor that's spent time in India and come back and wants to teach. And you want to be in there. But you're sitting outside doing what you've been assigned to do, watching the cow carcass rot. Is that good or bad? What would you have thought? Well, I thought it was pretty bad. I wanted to be in there feeding my intellect, right? That was Ram Dass, by the way. Well, it took me a long time, all day. In fact, I guess I'm a kind of slow spiritual learner. But I finally got that the point was it was a neutral event. It was simply life-changing forms. Everything else I was projecting onto it, all this bad, I'm not in there, I'm having to be here, that was all my stuff. Proof, it changed my life. I'd like to quote Ken Keyes, author and founder of the Living Love Center. He says, and I quote, "Life is always perfect, either for our enjoyment or for our growth. An aspect of the perfection of the universe is that we are given signals whenever our life is out of harmony with the universal principle. And the universe gives us these signals perfectly. We are given exactly what we need to move back into alignment with the universe. When we feel pain or discomfort, if we take the time to listen to the message that our pain and discomfort is giving us, we will know exactly what to do to bring ourselves into alignment with this universal principle. We then put ourselves in alignment with the universe. That is what every single being that's ever lived and is living now has learned or in some way has gained the wisdom for. We put ourselves in a situation where we can access all that. Our human perceptions of the universal scheme are very, very limited. Our senses and our intellect are capable of perceiving and understanding only a tiny fraction of the reality of the universe. The concept of perfection is much, much bigger than our limited understanding. It is a principle that we can understand only in an intuitive sense when we let all that absolute universal truth and wisdom align with us. The best way to understand it is to meditate on it for a period of time and to listen to what is revealed to you. The answer will come. It came to me that day. I had to watch the rotting car carcass instead of listening to Ram Dass teach. But it will come. Open up to it. Open up to the whole world, to all the eternal wisdom, the eternal truth. It will come, and you will be able to change your perceptions and live the life that you deserve to live. Thank you.